Hey there, Drowsy Historian here. Tonight you're not a warrior or a priest or anyone whose name survives on bark paper or temple wall. You're a commoner in Tenochtitlan, a market vendor or the apprentice of someone who still believes the world makes sense. You know the taste of clean lake water. You know how maize feels between your teeth. You know how to survive in a city that floats. And soon, you'll know what it's like to watch it drown. You won't be asked to fight. You'll just be asked to stay very still while everything you love is crushed beneath boots you don't recognize, in the name of a god who doesn't speak your language. Before the smallpox reaches your street, before the priests hammer crosses where gods used to stand, do me a favour. Leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is there. If you'd like early access to more grim bedtime stories, ad-free audio of the episodes, or just want to support the show, you'll find the Patreon link in the description. But for now, lie back, get comfortable. Let's begin. You live in a city made of stone and water, built on a lake that reflects the skies so perfectly, it feels like you're walking across the heavens. Tenochtitlan is not small, or quiet, or humble. It's loud with drums and chatter, markets and bells. It stretches farther than your feet ever bother to walk. You know the city by smells: roasted maize, crushed flowers, wet clay, and by the rhythm of footsteps over causeways wide enough to hold armies. It breathes, it pulses, it has rules, and for now, you fit inside them. You're no one important, you don't wear feathers or gold, you don't chant in temples or drink chocolate from carved obsidian. You work. Maybe you sweep floors in the palace district, or maybe you grind cochineal for a merchant who sells to the priesthood. Maybe you sell tamales in the shadow of a temple that reaches so high you can't look at the top without squinting. Your hands are red from spice and sun. Your feet are cracked from the salt of the lake. But there is always enough to eat, and more than enough to do, and most nights you sleep without fear. You were born into a world that already had order. Your job is to keep it tidy. The empire is large, too large maybe, but it still holds. Tributes arrive from cities you've only heard about in stories. Cacao from the south, jade and feathers from the coast. Warriors come home with jaguar pelts and broken bones, and stories of gods made flesh. You listen, but you don't really need to know how wars are won. Your part is here. You barter, you wash, you bow to statues and offer flowers and light. You follow the calendar. You do what you're told, and the world does not end. Even the market is a kind of miracle. You walk through it sometimes just to hear the noise. Vendors barking over squash and sandals, fish still flapping in woven baskets, musicians playing rhythms, while old women argue over chili paste. There's a man who paints faces for a few cacao beans, and a woman who sells salt dyed blue with crushed butterfly wings. You know which stalls to avoid after a bad rain, which ones overcharge tourists from Texcoco, and which old seller will sneak you a prayer bead if you help carry her things. Nothing in this place is quiet, but none of it is cruel. Not yet. The city runs on sacrifice, of course. You've seen it, the bright red trail down the temple steps, the priest in black with his blade of volcanic glass, the way the heart steams in the morning air. It's not something you talk about with strangers, but you don't flinch. It's how the sun keeps rising. It's how the corn grows. You don't question it. Questioning things is for people with too much time and not enough to lose. Besides, the gods have always answered, until they don't. You see the emperor sometimes from a distance. Moctezuma walks with the weight of mountains in his spine, robed in turquoise and shadow. No one looks him in the eye. Not even the wind touches him. He speaks through others, through signs, through priests, through silence so deep it feels like drowning. You don't love him exactly. Love is for people, but you trust him the way you trust that the lake won't boil and the sun won't vanish. He is part of the structure. He is the voice of the gods. And if he seems more afraid these days, well, maybe that's your imagination. Lately, the city feels different in small ways. The birds don't sing in the morning. The temple painters choose darker colours. The old woman who used to sit outside your home with her reed basket has stopped singing her prayers. People mutter more. There are arguments in the streets over nothing. You saw a nobleman spit in the dirt after looking at the sky, and no one cleaned it up. You don't understand why that matters, but it does. The sky feels heavier. The nights feel too long. The wind carries rumours now instead of songs. Still, you get up. You go to work. You eat when you can and sleep when you must. The lake laps at the edges of the city like it always has. The temple bells still ring in the morning. Your hands still sting from lime and ash. And if the children whisper about gods who no longer answer, you tell them to hush. Because cities like this don't end. They don't fall. They're too big to break. They eat the sky, remember? They float. They shine. And even if the cracks are beginning to show, you tell yourself that stone does not bleed. You are not rich. You are not powerful. But you are not afraid. Not yet. The signs begin quietly. A rumour about a comet. A patch of sky glowing where it shouldn't. You don't see it yourself, but someone swears they did. A fisherman's son who saw it over the lake one night. Burning blue and trailing ash. He says it was silent, which makes it worse somehow. The older men near the market say it's nothing. The old women disagree. They clutch their amulets tighter and leave more offerings than usual, just in case the gods are watching more closely now. You don't argue with them. You just sell your beans and keep your head low. If the sky wants to send warnings, it should do so to people who have the time to interpret them. Then one of the temples catches fire. Not from lightning, not from a torch, not from anything anyone can explain. It burns slow and strange, like the stone itself has decided to remember it's not supposed to stand forever. The flames lick up toward the sky without smoke, and no one dares put it out. Priests call it a trial. Others call it a punishment. No one calls it an accident, and still, the emperor says nothing. You hear about a woman in the streets who screams at night and disappears by morning. Always the same words. They're coming. You don't know what that means. Neither does anyone else. She appears near temples, near palaces, near doorways where new mothers sleep. You never see her yourself, but someone always has. A cousin, a friend, a neighbour's daughter. Her scream echoes against stone like it belongs here. Some say it's a ghost. Others say it's a goddess. Either way, no one sleeps well anymore. You wake more than once thinking you've heard her. Maybe you have. Or maybe fear is contagious. The Tlatoani grows quieter. You didn't hear him often before, only through messengers and decrees. But now, there are fewer of those. His face no longer appears at festivals. His voice no longer echoes from the temples. He stays in the palace surrounded by priests and omens and maps that no longer predict the weather. There's a heaviness in the air, like the city is waiting to be told something it already suspects. Moctezuma is not just a man, he is the hinge on which the world turns. And if he is silent, it means the gods are withholding something. Or perhaps he already knows what they've said. Omens multiply. A man is struck dead by lightning in the market. No clouds, no storm. Just a single white flash like the sky itself picked a target. A deer gives birth to a litter of snakes. A vendor swears her maize turned to ash overnight, though no one else saw it. You try not to believe any of it, but each day brings a new tale. You notice fewer people smiling, fewer children playing. Even the musicians begin to play slower, softer songs, as if their hands are remembering how grief feels before it arrives. There are messengers now, coming and going from the palace with more urgency than usual. Dust clings to their cloaks, and they ride their canoes like the water might disappear if they don't move quickly enough. Word spreads that foreign boats have been seen on the coast, big ones, not like anything you've ever imagined. Beasts made of wood that carry men who shine in the sunlight, as if they are part mirror, part monster. They ride animals no one has seen before, long-faced creatures with hooves and eyes too big for their skulls. They carry sticks that make thunder and metal that bleeds even through armor. You wonder if this is another story, another dream dressed as warning. You hope so, but then you hear that Moctezuma has sent gifts to them. That part is true. You see the procession leave the city with tribute: gold, feathers, jade, cloth, food. You don't know what's more frightening, that strangers have come, or that the emperor seems to think gifts will be enough. It's not war, it's not welcome, it's something in between, and no one knows how to name it. You ask someone what these men want, and they tell you they've come for gods. You don't know if they mean to bring their own or take yours. More days pass. The city doesn't stop moving. The market still bustles, the lake still rises and falls, but there's a tremor beneath it all. Like stone beginning to remember, it can crack. Priests add extra ceremonies to the calendar. You see more smoke on the water, more bells at the temples. And yet, the fear doesn't feel holy. It feels bureaucratic, like someone trying to appease a storm with paperwork. One afternoon, you catch yourself staring at the horizon. Just staring. You don't know what you expect to see. Fire, maybe. A face. A boat that shouldn't float. But it's still just sky and water. Still just the lake. You tell yourself that everything will be fine, because it has to be. Because Tenochtitlan is too big to fall. Because the gods love you. Because the emperor knows what he's doing. Because if those things aren't true, then none of this makes sense, and the silence you're hearing isn't caution. It's surrender. You don't pray more often now. You just listen harder, and the city does not speak back. They don't arrive quietly. Nothing about them is subtle. The first thing you notice is the smell. Leather. Sweat. Something metallic and rotting underneath. Not like warriors exactly. Worse. Like the scent of things that kill for a living, and don't bother to wash afterward. They ride beasts you've never seen before. Tall and narrow-eyed, their feet slapping the stone streets with a rhythm that doesn't belong here. The animals wear armour too, just like their riders. Metal over flesh, bone hidden beneath shining plates. They look like men only from a distance. Up close, you're not so sure. Their skin is pale, not just lighter than yours, but raw-looking, like something that's never seen sunlight. It makes you squint. Their beards are wrong. Too much hair in the wrong places. Too many sharp lines in faces that don't move like yours. When they speak, it sounds like coughing mixed with knives. Hard, rattling syllables that grind together, like stones being sharpened. They gesture wildly. They shout when they mean to explain. You can't understand their words, but their intentions are written all over their bodies. They aren't here to learn. They carry sticks that crack open the air itself. The first time you hear it, you flinch like everyone else. A flash, a roar, a sound that echoes off the temple walls, as if the city itself has been struck. You see smoke rising from the end of the stick and a man fall without a blade, having touched him. You've seen weapons all your life. Obsidian, flint, bone. But nothing like this. You don't know where the wound begins. You only know that it ends in death. You tell yourself it must be sorcery, because if it isn't, then it's worse. Then it's just cruelty made efficient. They are led by a man whose face is constantly clenched, like he's always chewing the inside of his own mouth. You don't know his name yet. You will. He speaks with the arrogance of someone who has never been told no by anyone who lived long enough to repeat it. When he points, people die. When he smiles, people disappear. He isn't loud, not always, but the quiet around him is sharp. It scrapes. You don't know why your leaders still treat him like a guest. He looks like a god, they say, as if gods ever needed that much metal to feel safe. The palace accepts them. That's the part you don't understand. They are fed. They are housed. They walk through the city like it belongs to them already. You see their faces twist as they look at the temples, the statues, the murals of blood and glory. They touch things they shouldn't. They laugh at things you revere. One of them spits on the ground near a shrine and keeps walking. You wait for the lightning. It doesn't come. Moctezuma meets with them. You hear about it, though you don't see it. The rumors say he bowed. You tell yourself that can't be true. The Tlatoani does not bow, not to anyone, not even the gods. But no one denies it with certainty. No one explains why these strangers were allowed into the sacred spaces, into the palace itself. You start to wonder if silence is a kind of agreement, if fear is now the language of diplomacy. They talk about their god, always their god. One god, they say, not many. Not rain, not war, not maize, not death. Just one. And he's jealous. He doesn't share. Their priests are pale too, their hands soft, their eyes always searching for things to destroy. They carry crosses and mutter things you don't understand. You watch them scowl at the statues, the painted codices, the offerings. Their gaze is the same one your butchers use on pigs. Not hatred, just hunger. More of them arrive. You don't know how. You don't know where they're coming from. Some are darker, some wear feathers taken from people who never gave them. They come with wounds and stories and weapons that don't belong in this world. Your city begins to feel crowded in the wrong places. They don't know how to move through the streets without bumping into things. They treat the lake like an obstacle. They call the canals filthy. You wonder how long they'll stay. You wonder why they haven't been made to leave. You still assume the gods will handle it? They always have. That's the bargain, right? You offer blood and breath and song, and they keep the world upright. That's how it's always worked. But lately, the gods have gone quiet. The omens continue. The woman still screams at night. Your neighbours start speaking in lower tones. A merchant leaves the city and doesn't return. The temple door is closed, and no one explains why. You walk to the market and realise half the stalls are gone. You don't fight. Not yet. You don't run. Where would you go? You do what you've always done. Keep your head down, work your hands, and pray that someone else is paying attention. That someone stronger, wiser, closer to the gods will do something before it's too late. But in the back of your mind, something cold is growing. A question with no good answer. What if this isn't the storm before the end? What if this is the end, and the storm has already passed? You never thought you'd see a god hesitate. That's what Moctezuma was, after all. Or close enough. He didn't walk like a man. He glided. His gaze could silence a courtyard. His voice could end a festival. You were raised to believe he knew things you didn't, saw futures you couldn't. And yet now, for the first time, you hear rumours that the Tlatoani is uncertain. Not angry, not commanding, just unsure. That somehow is worse than rage. Rage you could trust. Uncertainty feels like watching a stone statue flinch. You're told it's all part of a larger plan. Strategy. Diplomacy. The gods test their chosen ones with riddles. And this is just another riddle. That's why Moctezuma sends gifts to the strangers. Gold, food, fabrics, servants. It's not submission, you're told. It's a test, a trap. A way to learn what they want. But you've seen traps before. They usually don't involve handing the bait your palace keys. The strangers move through the city like they've already conquered it. They're not grateful. They're not humble. They're just waiting for something. And you've stopped pretending it's your approval. They're given rooms in the palace, not just rooms, chambers reserved for royalty, lined with carved stone and feathered mats. They sleep where no foreigner should sleep. Touch things no outsider should touch. They wander the halls like they belong there, with hands behind their backs and eyes that never stop calculating. You hear they've been allowed into the temples. You hear they've been shown sacred objects, relics no one outside the priesthood should ever see. You don't know how much of that is true, but the part that is true, that they're still here, is bad enough. Moctezuma speaks to them through translators, through gestures, through carefully arranged silences. He gives them gifts so often it begins to look less like diplomacy and more like tribute. He listens when they talk. He considers their words, and then, one day, he stops giving orders and starts asking questions. Should they be allowed into the temple again? Should they attend the next festival? Should the guards be moved back? No one says the word permission, but it hangs in the air like rot. And if you notice it, so do they. You hear that one of them laughed when a guard stepped aside to let him pass. Not politely, not in amusement, the way a butcher laughs when the pig walks itself to the block. They understand what's happening, even if you don't. They know they've passed some invisible threshold, that the balance of power has shifted, not with war, not with force, but with fear. And once that shift begins, there's no unbreaking it. Moctezuma, who once spoke for the gods, now pauses to hear the voice of men who speak of only one god, and speak loudly. The city begins to adjust, slowly, subtly. You see fewer guards in the streets. You see more strangers on balconies. One day, a priest hesitates during a ceremony. Another day, a market vendor refuses to sell to a noble. No one announces that the old order is cracking. It just creaks quietly, like wood in the wind. You want someone to do something. You want the Tlatoani to rise and scream and banish them all with a single gesture. But he doesn't. He waits. And waiting, you've learned, is not the same thing as ruling. There are whispers now, not just about the strangers, but about Moctezuma himself. That he sees visions. That he consults his priests more than his generals. That he has begun fasting longer than is wise. Some say he has already died, and what you see now is only a puppet, held up by ritual and desperation. Others say he knows the truth, that the gods have abandoned the city, and he is merely buying time. You don't know what to believe, but you do know this. No one used to speak about the emperor this way, not even in secret. One afternoon, you see a child bow to one of the armoured men, the way you would to a noble. You want to correct him, but you don't. Because maybe he's not wrong. Maybe that's what power looks like now. Pale skin, loud weapons, no gods but one, and no need to ask for anything anymore. Just take, just occupy, just smile, and let others explain your intentions for you. You watch the child straighten and skip away, proud of his manners. You say nothing. The gifts continue. The palace quiets. The ceremonies grow shorter. The city watches its own heartbeat falter and tries to pretend it's just a momentary pause. But you feel it. Everyone does. Something is unravelling. The kind of unravelling that doesn't make a sound until it's too late. You tell yourself that it's still possible to fix, that Moctezuma has a plan, that the gods are simply waiting for the right moment to act. But deep down, you've begun to wonder what happens when even the gods stop answering their own prayers. You're told this is peace, but it feels a lot like losing, just more politely. You go to dance, that's all it's supposed to be. A celebration, an offering, a reminder to the gods that you still remember how to give thanks. The square before the Templo Mayor hums with colour. Garlands of marigold, paint in every shade the earth has to offer. Faces masked in feathers and ash. The drums beat low and steady like a heartbeat, and the air is thick with incense and roasted maize. You've been to festivals before, but this one feels heavier. Not because anything is wrong yet, but because everything is still pretending not to be. The crowd sways as one body. Warriors in jaguar skins, dancers in copper bells, children weaving between legs with wide eyes and sticky hands. Offerings pile at the temple steps, obsidian blades, bone ornaments, flowers blooming too early in the season. You're near the back, watching, clapping in time with the drums. You feel the rhythm move up through your soles and into your ribs. It feels right. It feels like a memory you're proud to keep. The strangers are here too. Of course they are. You see them near the front, armoured, stiff, standing in the sun like statues made of rust and suspicion. Their eyes scan the crowd, but never with wonder. They watch the way a farmer watches animals before slaughter, not cruelly, just practically. They're out of place, but they don't seem to care. Some lean on their sticks, the thunder makers. Others rest their hands on hilts. You tell yourself they're just confused, still learning how to live among people who understand ceremony. You assume no one would dare desecrate the Templo Mayor. Not here, not during a festival, not in front of the gods. Then it happens. You don't know what starts it. A wrong look maybe, a priest's gesture misinterpreted, or no reason at all. The Spanish draw their blades mid-ceremony, long, narrow things that flash too bright in the sun. And they begin to cut, not fight, not warn, just cut. The first screams come too late to stop the second swing. You see one dancer fall, his bells still jingling as his throat opens. You see feathers torn from skulls, arms lopped from bodies that hadn't raised them in defence, blood painting the temple steps before the gods even asked for it. Panic is not the right word. Panic is quick. This is slower. A crawling, suffocating understanding that the sacred has been violated beyond repair. People run, but not fast enough. The drums don't stop right away, which makes it worse. For a few unbearable seconds, there is rhythm underneath the slaughter, music behind the screaming. You try to move, but the crowd is too dense. You're pushed sideways, into someone else's back, someone else's breath. You feel blood on your calves before you realise it isn't yours. The guards don't come, or if they do, they're cut down just as quickly. Or you don't see them fight back. Maybe they're stunned. Maybe they were told to stand down. Maybe they were never told anything at all. You look to the temple, expecting to see a priest intervene, a god appear, something to put a stop to this. But there is only chaos. A man stumbles into you, eyes wide, holding his stomach closed with both hands. You don't help him. You just move, because that's what survival looks like now. Motion without thought, fear without strategy. The blood reaches your ankles before the screaming stops. Not because everyone is safe, because there's no one left to scream. The Spanish are methodical, not frantic. This isn't rage, it's something colder. Like they're cutting weeds, not people. Like the dancing was never real. The paint, the masks, the offerings, all just noise to them. You see one of them bend down and pull gold from a corpse's necklace, pocketing it before stepping over the body like it was driftwood. When you finally reach a corner of the square where no blades are swinging, you collapse behind a broken cart and stare at your hands. They're red, not metaphorically, red like you dipped them in paint. You press them to your chest to hide the shaking, but it doesn't help. Across the square, you can still hear the wet sound of metal in meat. You can smell the mix of sweat, flowers, and viscera. Someone sobs nearby, not loudly, just rhythmically, like breathing through a wound. No one explains it afterward. There is no official message, no apology, just silence. The bodies are cleared before nightfall, though the stains remain. You return to the square the next day and see it covered in fresh garlands, as if nothing happened, as if the blood never reached the altar, as if the gods hadn't been mocked, their temple turned into a slaughterhouse. People walk by with baskets and jugs talking about the weather. You hear laughter from a nearby alley. You want to scream, but your throat has learned how to stay closed. The Templo Mayor still stands, but it feels smaller now. Not physically, spiritually. Like a wall has been breached that cannot be rebuilt. The gods don't answer that night. The incense rises into a sky that doesn't blink. You lie on your sleeping mat, awake until dawn, listening to the city pretend nothing has changed. But everything has. The dancers are gone, the drums are silent, and the blood is still drying beneath the stones. You went to dance, and left with ghosts stuck to your feet. After the festival massacre, everything becomes quieter, but not in a way that brings peace. It's the hush of something sacred having been snapped in half. A kind of silence that doesn't feel earned, just imposed. No one talks about what happened at the Templo Mayor, but everyone remembers. The blood was too loud to forget. And in that silence, the foreigners grow louder. They talk more now, about their God, about salvation, about how all of this, all of you, is wrong. Their voices fill the spaces where yours used to be. They say their God is merciful, that he loves you, that he died for you. You've never heard of a god dying before. It sounds more like a threat than a promise, but they keep saying it over and over, like repetition will make it holy. Their priests walk through the streets with wooden crosses and grim smiles, pointing at statues and murals with the same expression one might use while identifying an infestation. They don't even bother hiding their disgust. They look at your temples like they're rotting meat, at your people like you're salvageable, only if you forget everything you've ever known. You're told to renounce your gods. Not just the war gods or the death gods, all of them. The rain, the sun, the wind, the maize, the gods of mothers, the gods of sickness, the gods that live in rivers and trees and bones. All of them, erased in favour of one man nailed to a tree. A man they insist is God and king and saviour and corpse all at once. You ask if he has a temple. They say he is the temple. You ask what offerings he likes. They say he doesn't want offerings, just obedience. You've never heard of a god who doesn't take gifts. It feels like a trick. They smash the idols, not in secret, but proudly, as if they believe destruction is proof of righteousness. They enter shrines with muddy boots and iron tools, dragging statues into the light and breaking them apart on the stones where people once knelt to pray. You watch one of them lift an obsidian mask high over his head and bring it down on a rock until the pieces scatter like teeth. The sound echoes across the square. No one stops him, not even the sky. That's when it really starts to feel like the gods are leaving. They go after the sacred groves next. You remember playing there as a child, weaving between trees that were older than your grandparents, tying bits of cloth to branches to ask for luck or forgiveness. The groves are hacked down, not even burned, just left to rot, roots exposed like bones from an unburied corpse. The priests call it purification. You call it desecration, but not out loud, not anymore. You pretend to listen. You nod when they talk about sin, about salvation, about the eternal fire waiting for the unconverted. You keep your eyes down when they hand out tokens with the cross etched into them and demand you wear one like a brand. You attend their ceremonies with your mouth shut and your hands still, standing in crowds that do not sing, in temples that do not breathe. You tell yourself you're surviving. That silence is not surrender, but you feel it creeping in anyway. Even the children are changing. You see them learning new words, forgetting old prayers. Some are taken to schools run by the priests, where they are taught that your history is a lie and your language is filth. They come back speaking that grinding foreign tongue, quoting verses they don't understand, but repeat anyway. They call your gods devils. They call the sacrifices barbaric. You want to ask them what's more barbaric, giving your heart to the sun so it rises, or spilling blood for gold and calling it progress. There are baptisms now, forced mostly. They call them ceremonies. You've seen them. A line of people, men, women, children, shoved toward a font where a pale man in cloth mutters over them in a language that doesn't belong here. Water touches their heads, and then they're no longer who they were. Their names are taken. Their gods are stripped away. They are told they've been cleansed. They are told they're reborn. But the ones who come out of the ceremony don't look new. They look smaller, less real, like something vital has been washed away along with the soot. Some people still resist, quietly, an offering left in the dark, a prayer whispered into a cracked idol buried behind a wall, a feast held with the wrong foods on the wrong day for the right reasons. But it's getting harder. Eyes are everywhere. So are punishments. You hear of one man flogged for singing an old song, another jailed for carving a forgotten symbol into the dirt. You wonder how long until they start punishing thoughts too, if they haven't already. And through all of it, the gods remain silent. That's the part that stings the most. You've prayed, you've begged, you've offered what little you still have, and nothing answers. No signs, no visions, no sacred dreams. Just wind, just sky, just the sound of foreign hymns echoing off your temples like laughter in a graveyard. You don't cry, not in front of them. But deep down, you know the truth. The gods are dying. And the dead don't convert. You thought the worst had come. You really did. After the massacre at the temple, after the idols were shattered and the sacred groves hacked down, after your gods fell silent and your emperor stopped making sense, you thought there was nothing else to lose. But you hadn't yet learned how many layers grief could have. You hadn't yet met the kind of death that doesn't come with a sword or a scream, that doesn't even look like violence until it's far too late. You hadn't met the fever. It starts quietly, like most ruin does. A woman in the southern district doesn't rise from her sleeping mat. Her sister says she was shivering through the night, then burning by morning. When they tried to rouse her, her skin cracked under their touch. At first, you don't think much of it. People fall ill. Sometimes they recover. Sometimes they don't. That's life. But then a boy collapses while sweeping the temple steps. Then an old man keels over during a sermon, eyes wide, throat bubbling. The bodies begin to pile up, and none of them bear wounds. The symptoms are strange, not like the common sicknesses you've seen before. This is something new. First the fever, then the swelling, then the bleeding. Skin blackens and splits like overripe fruit. Eyes cloud over in days, sometimes hours. The smell of rot sets in before breath even stops. You hear that in some cases the tongue swells so large it blocks the mouth entirely. That others bleed from the nose until there's nothing left to drain. You don't know what smallpox is. You don't know the word, and even if you did, it wouldn't help. Names don't stop dying. It moves fast, faster than any army. One day your neighbour is fine, bartering over chili peppers. The next, her house is marked with a charcoal smear on the doorpost, and no one enters. The priests try to bless the sick, but they don't get close. The foreign ones make the sign of the cross and back away. They seem almost bored by it, like they expected this, like they've seen it before. You wonder if maybe they brought it with them. You wonder if maybe that was the plan all along. You don't go to the market anymore. No one does. The stalls are half empty, the air too thick with the scent of sweat and fear. The food starts to spoil where it sits. Even the birds stop coming. The lake turns quiet, the boats fewer and farther between. People cover their mouths with cloth, not because it helps, but because it gives the illusion of protection. Some burn herbs in clay pots and carry them through the streets. Others chant new prayers or cut their hair in mourning. Nothing works. The sickness doesn't care what you believe. You try to stay clean. You wash your hands with river water, scrub your mat with lime and ash, but it still finds a way in. A cousin, a friend, a child you once shared a sweet with, all of them gone within days. There's no ceremony anymore, no time for it. Bodies are wrapped in rush mats and pushed into pits, sometimes before they're even cold. The scent of death settles into the stones. You can't walk a single block without stepping past a door someone has barred from the outside. And the worst part is how normal it becomes. You get used to seeing people collapse, to hearing the coughs echo at night like some broken chorus. You get used to the smell, to the silence, to the way no one makes eye contact anymore. Everyone is watching for symptoms. You become suspicious of your own breath. You sleep lightly, ears trained for the sound of someone choking nearby. When you wake, the first thing you do is check your skin for blisters. You stop praying, not out of spite, just exhaustion. What kind of gods would need this much convincing to act? You've already given them your voice, your festivals, your idols, your blood. Now they want your body too? Number. You save your strength. You fold your hands, not in worship, but in stillness, the way a person does when they know no one is listening. The foreigners stay mostly healthy. That's the other thing no one says out loud, but everyone sees. They move through the city untouched, still shouting about salvation, still holding their books and swinging their crosses. One or two fall sick, but they recover. You don't know why. Maybe they were born with the sickness inside them and learned to carry it without dying. Maybe this is just another weapon, one they don't have to aim. You used to think an invasion would come with banners and fire, with armies at the gates. But this is worse. This is a death that wears no armour, makes no demands, and waits for no permission. You hear someone say, "This is the end of the world." You don't correct them, not because you agree, because you've started to wonder if it ended already. And this is just the part where it finishes rotting. You tell yourself you'll survive. You've said that before, but this time you don't say it out loud. Because you've seen what happens to people who make promises the air can hear. It doesn't begin with a trumpet or a declaration. It begins with something small, rumours of resistance, of nobles speaking more boldly behind closed doors, of priests whispering old prayers again, the kind that ask not for mercy, but for war. You feel it in the streets, in the way people walk faster and speak more softly. You hear it in the way the drums return, low and cautious at first, then louder. There's a beat building beneath the city, and it's not coming from the foreigners. It's coming from the ground itself, as if the stones are remembering who they used to serve. Then at last, someone stops waiting. It happens fast. The palace where the Spanish have made themselves comfortable turns into a trap. Nobles and warriors, some in armour, some in rags, rise up inside and outside the walls. The foreigners are caught between causeways, temples, and a city that no longer pretends to welcome them. Blades flash, fires are set. You see smoke curling up from the palace rooftops and hear the screams of men who once walked through the streets like they owned them. You don't cheer, not yet. You've seen too much to trust early victories, but others do. The city erupts with shouts and chants as the tide turns. People climb rooftops to get a better look. Some toss stones or burning coals. Others just watch, their eyes wide with something close to hope. The foreigners retreat toward the lake, hauling what they can, carrying sacks so heavy they slow their escape. You hear someone say they're filled with gold, that they try to take it with them, even now. Even while fleeing, you want to laugh, but you don't. Because you know how much blood that gold already cost. You don't fight. You're not a warrior. You're not trained or armoured or foolish, but you do move through the streets with purpose again. You carry water to the wounded. You help pull barricades into place. You walk past the shattered remnants of shrines and know for the first time in months that you're not alone in your anger. This is the first time since the ships arrived that the city feels like it belongs to its people again. The battle spills toward the causeways, those long stone bridges that connect Tenochtitlan to the outer lands. You hear later that the Spanish tried to flee at night, under cover of rain and shadow, dragging stolen treasure and bleeding comrades through waterlogged streets. But they don't get far. The bridges are narrow, the lake is wide, and rage, it turns out, floats just fine. Warriors attack from both sides. Canoes surround the retreating columns, arrows fly and so do curses. The causeways become bottlenecks, traps, graves. They call it La Noche Triste, the Night of Sorrows. That's what the Spanish name it anyway. You suppose for them it was. Many die. Some drown under the weight of their own stolen gold, dragged down by greed faster than any blade could cut. You're told one man wept under a tree afterward, soaking wet and empty-handed. You're told he'll come back with vengeance in his chest. But that night, at least, he flees like a thief. You wish you could have seen it. People celebrate. Not a festival exactly. No one's in the mood for music, but there is joy. Quiet, bruised, stubborn joy. The kind that comes from watching someone bleed who thought they were untouchable. You hear people calling the gods by name again. You see someone sweep a shrine clean and place fresh flowers there, as if to say, "We're still here." You see children play in the street without flinching at shadows. You feel something shift, but it isn't enough. Because your night of sorrow didn't start on the causeway. It started long before the blood ran into the lake. It started the moment your gods fell silent. the moment your emperor looked away, the moment you realized that death doesn't always come with a warning. That night of sorrow lives in your bones now, in the way you flinch at loud noises, in the way you count coughs in your sleep, in the way you fold your prayers smaller and smaller, hoping they'll fit inside a world that no longer has room for them. And it isn't over. You know that. You feel it in the city's breath. The enemy's gone, but not defeated. You've heard stories of reinforcements, of armies massing beyond the horizon. You know this wasn't an ending. It was an interruption, a gasp in the middle of drowning, a chance to cough up some of the water before it fills your lungs again. You tell yourself you'll be ready next time, that the city has remembered how to fight, that the people will no longer bow out of habit. But part of you wonders how much more there is to lose, how many more nights of sorrow one city can endure, how much grief the stone can hold before it starts to crack. You always knew they would come back. No one flees like that without planning revenge. You'd hoped, briefly, naively, that the humiliation of La Noche Triste would be enough to keep them away, that the gods might show mercy now that you'd bled for them again. But mercy isn't part of the story anymore. The Spanish return, but they don't come alone. This time, they bring an army large enough to blacken the hillsides. Not of Spaniards, there aren't enough of them for that, but of allies. Thousands of warriors from rival cities. People who hate the empire more than they fear foreigners. People who were once made to pay tribute, now armed and eager to burn the capital that drained them dry. You don't blame them, not really. Tenochtitlan has many enemies. The empire was never kind. Tribute didn't ask, it took. And now, every city that's ever been conquered, every village that's ever sent its best men to die for someone else's glory, marches toward your home with fire in their eyes and steel behind them. You want to believe this is still about gods or faith or diplomacy, but it isn't. This is punishment, and you're the one who gets to starve for it. The siege begins with silence, no dramatic assault, no flaming arrows, just the steady tightening of a noose. The causeways are blocked, the canals are choked with debris and bodies. The Spanish build boats, crude ones, ugly and effective, and use them to cut off the lake itself. You don't even know how that's possible. The lake was always sacred, always safe. Now it turns to sludge. The fish vanish, the water stinks, the colour changes from blue to brown to something darker. You don't fetch drinking water anymore. You fetch sickness. The chinampas, your floating farms, your green lifelines, are torched, not by accident, deliberately. One by one the plots are set aflame, their crops reduced to ash that drifts across the lake like dead prayers. You watch smoke rise in the distance and realise that your next meal is not coming. There will be no harvest, no trade, no tribute, just hunger. At first it's manageable. You ration, you make do, you water down the maize paste, you eat smaller portions and convince yourself that it's temporary. But the days stretch and the hunger grows teeth. You boil leather, not just straps or scraps, but shoes, belts, mats, anything softened by age and soaked in water long enough to chew. You peel bark from trees and grind it into powder, mixing it with rainwater that tastes like rot. You even eat the sandals off your own feet. It doesn't help. It just slows the dying. People get creative. That's what hunger does. You hear stories, some true, some whispered in corners, about rats caught and shared, dogs missing from the streets. Eventually, you hear worse. Stories that make you stop asking questions. You learn how to ignore certain smells, how to walk past closed doors without wondering what's happening inside. Morality peels off like scabs. You stop judging. You stop dreaming. You just wait for the next bowl of anything. You hold that bowl to the sky every time the clouds roll in. Rain used to be a blessing, a gift from the gods. Now it's your only source of water, and even that feels cursed. The rain is thick and gritty, laced with ash and filth from the burning farms. You drink it anyway. You don't even boil it. There's no wood left to burn. You just tip your head back and open your mouth like a child, praying you catch enough to make it another day. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. People begin to swell, not from health, but from starvation. Bellies bloat, limbs shrink, eyes sink into skulls like seeds into dry soil. You see your neighbours lose teeth, hair, speech. You see strong men collapse after walking a single block. You see mothers cradling children who no longer cry because crying takes strength. The city stinks of decay. You stop stepping over the dead. There's no room for that anymore. You just step around them if you can. The priests continue their ceremonies, but they look thinner too. Their chants are hollow, their offerings meagre. You wonder what kind of gods would demand loyalty from the starving? What kind of gods still want blood when there's nothing left to give? You no longer attend the rituals, not out of disrespect, just fatigue. The hunger is louder than the prayers. The Spanish circle tighter. Their cannons, those booming mouths of iron, speak often. Each blast feels like punctuation in a sentence you don't want to finish. Stones crumble, walls crack, the air shakes in your chest. You stop reacting after a while. What's the point? They're not aiming at you specifically, just everything that used to mean something. You don't know how long it's been. Time doesn't make sense anymore. Hunger rewrites the calendar. Days are measured by how many people died and whether you found anything to eat. You've lost count of both. You keep moving even when your body tells you not to. You don't want to die lying down. You used to think starvation was quiet. It isn't. It howls in your belly. It moans in your bones. It scrapes the insides of your thoughts, like a spoon against an empty pot. And worst of all, it teaches you just how long a person can survive without being alive. It doesn't fall all at once. Nothing ever does. Tenochtitlan is too proud, too vast, too heavy to die quickly. It comes down in pieces, walls first, then homes, then people. Block by block, the city erodes beneath your feet, each section consumed by fire, by steel, by hunger. You hear it before you see it. The crack of stone as it splits, the hiss of torch against reed roof, the shouts of fighters bleeding into the lake. It's a slow kind of ending, methodical, like someone dismantling a god one limb at a time. You stay near your district, though there's not much left to call home. The canals have turned to sludge. The food is long gone. The air stinks of smoke and old flesh. The causeways are broken now, deliberately shattered to keep the enemy from flooding in too fast. It worked for a while, but they're clever, or cruel, or both. They rebuild their bridges as quickly as you destroy them. And they come from the water now, too. Boats with sails like torn wings, each one packed with men who've learned how to kill without flinching. You hear stories as you scavenge, about noble warriors leaping into the lake rather than let themselves be taken. Some say they wore their finest feathers, their battle paint untouched, their obsidian blades clutched tight even as they sank. You try to picture it, proud men disappearing beneath the surface, choosing silence over submission. You don't judge them, but you don't leap. You don't fight, you hide, because you're not a warrior. You never were, and dying beautifully has never appealed to you as much as living badly. Your house, what's left of it, caves in one night under the weight of smoke and time. You don't rebuild. You just move into the corner of a temple that no longer belongs to any god. There are others there too, ghosts who breathe. People like you who stopped trying to pretend this city is anything but a grave with better architecture. You share what you have, which isn't much. Bits of bark, scraps of fabric, old memories you speak aloud to keep from forgetting who you were. When the walls finally break, it doesn't feel like a scream. It feels like a sigh. You hear them crumble from across the city, the low groan of stone giving way to fire and boots and hunger with armour on. The enemy floods in, not with ceremony or triumph, just the casual momentum of men who've stopped being afraid of you. They sweep through the streets, like they're sweeping dust from a floor. You don't run. You stopped running days ago. You just press your back to the nearest wall and hope to disappear. There are no more lines, no more safe places. You see fires ahead of you and behind you. You hear shouting in languages you still don't understand. Commands barked and answered with steel. Someone tries to surrender and is trampled before he can finish the word. Someone else is dragged from a collapsed home, screaming, only to vanish beneath a dozen hands. You don't move, you don't breathe, you try to make yourself smaller than your own shadow, and then they find you. Not personally, not cruelly, just eventually. The way someone eventually finds a crack in a door or a soft spot in a wall. A boot kicks over the door you didn't bother barricading. A hand grabs your wrist and yanks you into the light. You blink against the sun, dazed, starving, skin crusted with dirt and sweat and whatever came before. You think they'll kill you. You almost hope they will, but they don't. Instead, they laugh. Not all of them, just one. The man holding you looks at your face and grins the way a butcher might grin at a lamb that's already stopped struggling. You fall to your knees before he says a word. Not because you're brave or even because you're scared, but because your body no longer remembers how to do anything else. You bow like a broken thing. You don't even cry. There's no moisture left for that. You hear other voices nearby. Other survivors, if that's the word. Some pleading, some silent, some chanting fragments of old prayers that no longer seem to fit this version of the world. You think about the temples, the songs, the feasts, the gods. You think about maize and rain and painted murals that used to glow in the morning light. You think about how much of that is ash now. You think about what happens next. You don't want to, but there's nothing else left to think about. This is the part no one teaches you, that when your city falls, when your gods vanish, when the walls break and the streets run red and your neighbours are gone, you don't become a hero. You don't rise from the rubble with a new name. You don't carry the memory of your people forward. You just kneel, you beg, because that's what cornered animals do when the knife is already halfway in. You thought collapse would feel like noise. It doesn't. It feels like the absence of options. You don't remember when they told you your name was wrong. Not the first time. It wasn't a conversation. No one asked you what you'd like to be called instead. They just said it, this strange foreign sound, and repeated it until someone else wrote it down. You tried once to correct them, told them what your name really was, the one your mother whispered into your ear as a baby, the one the market vendors used, the one the gods knew. They smiled, said something in their language, and handed you a wooden cross. That was the end of the discussion. The baptism comes next, not by invitation, not by understanding, just inevitability. You're pulled into the shadow of a building that used to be a temple, but now bears a rough new sign, painted in a script you can't read. There's water in a basin, a priest in cloth. He doesn't look at you when he says the words. He just touches your forehead with wet fingers, mumbles a prayer to a god who has never spoken to you, and announces that you are now saved. You don't feel saved. You feel wet, cold, and smaller than before. They tell you it's a gift, that this new god, this one god, the only one, has accepted you, that you're cleansed, reborn, claimed. But all you feel is the loss of something you can't name. It's not just your gods they strip away. It's your rituals, your seasons, your names for the stars. The words you grew up with begin to vanish from the mouths around you. Even the air feels heavier now, like it's pressing down on you instead of lifting prayers upward. Your home, or what's left of it, becomes a church, not through rebuilding, but through redefinition. The old murals are painted over, the statues are pulled down and replaced with thin wooden men hanging from crosses, mouths frozen mid-agony. The incense smells wrong. The music doesn't match the shape of the space. You're told to kneel when the bell rings, to speak in a language that hurts your tongue, to confess things you don't feel guilty about. You don't understand most of it, but that doesn't matter. Understanding isn't required. Obedience is. The priest tells you this is peace, that the fighting is over now. that the city can heal. You look around and wonder what version of peace involves so many guards, so many whips, so much silence. You try not to ask questions anymore. They don't go unanswered, they go punished. You've seen it. A man flogged for praying in the wrong direction. A child slapped for saying the wrong god's name during a lullaby. No trials, just correction. You keep your head down. You learn the signs, when to cross yourself, when to speak, when to pretend you don't notice that everything smells like ash. You eat what they give you. You wear what they hand you. You go to mass and listen to stories about sheep and sin, and a kingdom you're supposed to be grateful for, though no one can point to where it is. They say it's eternal, that it's here and not here, that it's in your heart. You don't feel it. All you feel is hungry. Sometimes late at night, you whisper your old prayers under your breath, not because you think they'll work, but because silence feels like betrayal. You close your eyes and try to remember the rhythm of the old songs, the taste of the festival bread, the colour of the banners during a ceremony whose name you're not allowed to say anymore. You light a candle behind your home, just a small one, and place a bit of corn beside it. The wind blows it out before it can burn halfway. Maybe the gods are gone. Maybe they're just too tired to come back. The children don't remember. That's the worst part. They grow up learning the new words, the new rules. They kneel without flinching. They cross themselves without thinking. They correct their elders when old customs slip out. You hear your neighbour's son say, "That's pagan," in the same tone someone might say, "That's spoiled." He's 6. He already knows what parts of his own culture are worth discarding. You want to shake him, you want to scream, but he's not wrong. He's just early. You're told you're lucky, that you survived, that others died resisting, and you're still here. You try to feel lucky, but it's hard to feel fortunate when every corner of your life has been redrawn by someone else's hand. You survived, yes, but the version of you that lived before, the one who danced in the plaza, who knew the names of 500 gods, who walked barefoot on temple steps and knew the taste of offerings, that version is ash. They say you're saved. They say your soul belongs to heaven now. But if this is salvation, then you wonder what damnation looked like. Because what you're living in doesn't feel holy. It feels hollow, like a story that's been translated too many times by people who never cared what the original meant. And yet, you nod, you kneel, you say, Amen. Because in a world where your gods are dust, your name is foreign, and your faith has been replaced with fire, pretending to believe is the last thing you still have control over. You live. That's what they call it anyway. You wake up. You eat when there's food. You work when you're told. You don't die, and in this new world, that's apparently enough to be considered fortunate. But nothing about your days feels like survival. Survival implies momentum, a direction, a reason to keep going. What you're doing isn't that. What you're doing is floating, adrift in someone else's story, anchored only by the weight of your own memory. You don't sell maize anymore. There's no market for it, not like before. The old plaza where you used to trade is now occupied by soldiers and priests. The stalls are gone. The laughter is gone. In its place are long lines of people waiting for bread handed out by pale men who wear metal, even when they don't need to. You still remember how to choose the best ears of corn by smell and colour, how to wrap them in husks just tight enough to steam. No one asks you to do that now. You haul wood or dig ditches or carry stone, tasks with no skill, no pride, no meaning. Your prayers are gone too. Or if they're still there, they don't leave your lips. You mutter the new words they taught you, but they don't stick. They feel like borrowed clothes, never quite fitting, always slightly off. When you try to remember the old ones, they come back incomplete, frayed around the edges like a garment, eaten by time. You once lit incense at dawn and thanked the sun for rising. Now you're told that doing so marks you as a heretic. You still thank the sun sometimes, quietly, under your breath, as if apologising for the gesture. Your neighbours are disappearing. Not in bursts, not in blood, just gradually, quietly, the way rot eats at the base of a tree long before the trunk falls. Some are sent to work in the mines, far away, where they dig for metals the conquerors seem to value more than people. Others vanish into missions, where they're promised education, salvation, and bread. Sometimes they come back with blank eyes and strange new names. Sometimes they don't come back at all. You stop asking where people have gone. You stop expecting to see familiar faces. Your children speak Spanish now. Not fluently, not well, but enough. Enough to understand orders, enough to recite prayers, enough to correct your pronunciation. You watch them stumble over the names of things they used to know instinctively. The lake, the plants, the gods, and feel something tear quietly inside your chest. They ask fewer questions about your childhood. They no longer want to hear your stories. The tales of painted temples and floating gardens sound too much like lies in the world they've inherited. You taught them to survive, and they learn to forget. You speak less now. Words feel dangerous. They can be misunderstood, twisted, used against you. You've seen it happen. A joke overheard becomes a sentence. A memory mistaken for defiance becomes a punishment. So you keep your mouth shut, except when someone asks you something directly. You speak silence fluently now. It fills the gaps where your language used to live. It grows roots in your stomach and climbs up your throat until it feels like a second skin. Sometimes you dream in Nahuatl, whole sentences, rich and warm and soft like old blankets. But when you wake, you don't remember what you said. You just remember that it felt like home. You lie there, eyes open, listening to the city breathe its new language, and you feel like a ghost haunting your own skin. They give you new holidays, saints' days, foreign festivals, parades with paper icons and sermons you don't understand. You show up when required. You nod at the right moments. You bow your head and pretend to believe. You even force yourself to sing the hymns now and then, though the melodies twist the wrong way in your chest. You're not angry, not even sad. You're just tired of pretending that any of this is yours. There's food most days, bread instead of maize, beans but never with the spice you used to grow. They call it charity. You call it rationing. They say the city is peaceful now. You say it's quiet because no one has the strength to speak. The colours have faded, the murals are gone, the gods are buried, but the conquerors smile. So it must be peace. You don't cry, you don't rage. That would imply a hope that someone might care. What you do is endure. You walk, you eat, you sleep. You respond when spoken to. You let the days pass, you survive in the way that plants survive when they're paved over, by curling into whatever cracks remain, by refusing to die even when no one would notice if you did. They say you've been saved, that you live in a better world now, that you're free, but you know better. Freedom isn't silence, and living isn't the same as surviving. What you're doing is not life, it's aftermath. They don't burn the codices all at once. Like everything else they've taken, they destroy them slowly, deliberately, as if the fire works better that way. You see it begin with a priest standing before a pile of bark paper books, holding one up like it's something diseased. He reads from it, mocking the symbols, twisting the words, pretending he understands what he's holding, and then drops it into the flames. The rest follow, not in anger, but in duty, as if this is a necessary act, as if purging memory is part of salvation. You know what those books held? Not just stories, though there were plenty of those, gods and births and wars and songs. They held knowledge, calendars, maps, healing practices, names of stars and which gods moved through them. They held lineages, instructions, prayers, instructions for festivals, records of rain and famine and marriage. They held the past. And with each one burned, a little more of the past curls into ash and rises into a sky that no longer belongs to you. You aren't allowed to touch them anymore. Even if you find one half buried in a ruined home, even if it's your family's, even if you know how to read it, especially then, you're told to surrender it. You're told these books are dangerous, that they contain lies and heresies, that your ancestors were devil worshippers who poisoned the earth with false gods and false wisdom. You watch people hand over their last remaining fragments of culture, like criminals surrendering stolen property. Some cry, some don't. Everyone watches the flames. Your language is next. It doesn't disappear with violence, just erosion. Like a shoreline eaten away by tide, you're told to speak Spanish in the church, at work, in the schools. The children pick it up quickly. They speak it back and forth in games, correcting each other's grammar with smug pride. You try to learn it too, but the words taste like rust in your mouth. Sharp, foreign, filled with shapes your tongue doesn't know how to make. You speak less as a result. It's easier, safer. When you do speak your own language, it's in whispers, behind closed doors, with people you trust, which means fewer people every year. You hear about men arrested for reciting poems, about women whipped for teaching their children old words. You start to forget some yourself, not just vocabulary, but intonations, rhythms. One day, you try to recall the proper phrase for a funeral song and come up blank. You hum it instead, half tunes, and it feels like failing someone you loved. They build schools now, not many, but enough to matter. The priests teach letters, numbers, prayers, things that aren't yours. You see your neighbour's son proudly scrawl out a Spanish verse and show it to his mother. She smiles, but her eyes don't. You wonder if he even knows the name of the god who used to bless the maize fields, or what the red stripe in the harvest robes meant. Probably not. He'll learn to read, but not to remember. Your knowledge, real knowledge, is treated like superstition. Herbal remedies are called witchcraft. Agricultural methods are replaced with clumsier ones, imported from across the sea. The sacred way you once watched the skies, tracking planets and eclipses with precision, is laughed off as astrology. You were taught to listen to the wind, to read the lake's moods. Now you're told those signs are meaningless, that only one book matters, and it isn't written in a language you understand. They say this is progress, that forgetting is part of growing, that the old ways were violent, primitive, embarrassing. They say this while handing you a whip, while hanging your friend, while forcing you to kneel to a god who looks nothing like you. They say your people are savage, that you were lost, and now you're found. You look around and wonder what's been found exactly. It isn't peace, it isn't pride, it's obedience, but it's dressed in robes and scented with incense, so they call it holiness. You want to fight it. You do. But you've seen what happens to people who try. They vanish, or worse, they stay, broken in ways that don't heal. So you nod, you keep your head down, you memorize what you're told, and unlearn what you must. You let your memories fade, not because they don't matter, but because repeating them out loud has become a form of self-destruction. Survival requires forgetting. It always has. You just never thought you'd be required to forget yourself. Sometimes in the early hours of the morning, you wake up with a word on your tongue that you haven't used in years. A name, a god, a plant. You say it aloud to the empty room, softly, like an apology. And for a moment, it feels like you've pulled something back from the fire, but then the moment passes, and the word feels strange again, like it belongs to someone else, like you borrowed it from a ghost. The codices are gone, the murals are faded, the chants are stilled. You can still see fragments of what once was in the cracks, on the side of a temple wall, in the lines of an elder's face, in a song someone hums when they think no one's listening, but it's fading. Not because you want it to, but because forgetting is safer now than remembering ever was. They burned your books, now they burn your memory, and you let them, because the smoke no longer stings like it used to. The city still stands. That's what they say, as if the stone alone was ever the point. But it doesn't stand for you anymore. It's the same streets, the same canals, the same outlines of temples now flattened into churches, but none of it feels familiar. The shape remains, but the soul is gone. The air smells different now, sharp with smoke and sweat and foreign oil. Gone are the incense trails from early morning offerings. Gone is the scent of maize roasting in the market. In their place are burning candles, dry bread, and the stink of iron. It prays differently too. The songs are in another tongue, the rhythms stilted and hollow. You attend mass like you're supposed to, kneeling when the bells ring, bowing when the pale priest speaks, but none of it feels real. The God they talk about doesn't feel like a presence so much as a rule book. He doesn't ask for dance or story or sacrifice. He demands silence and fear and the right posture. You used to pray with flowers in your hands and music in your chest. Now your prayers sound like someone else's homework. The city speaks a language that isn't yours and doesn't want to be. Children learn it in school. Adults fake it in church. You know enough to survive. How to say yes. How to say forgive me. How to say I don't know. But not enough to be heard. You say the wrong word and they laugh. You say the right one with the wrong accent and they scowl. So you stop trying. You keep your words small and few and safe. You become fluent in agreeing with things you don't believe. You work the fields now. Not yours, not anyone's. Just land divided up and handed out like loot. You remember when that patch of earth was sacred, when it belonged to a god of fertility and rain. You remember the ceremonies, the garlands, the songs. Now it's just a place to dig. You grow barley instead of maize. You do it with your head down, using tools made by hands that never touched the old soil before they claimed it. No one blesses the first harvest anymore. They bless the hands that count the grain. Sometimes you pass one of the old temples, or what's left of it. The new church squats on top like a scab, whitewashed and smug. You used to climb those steps barefoot as a child, carrying flowers or fruit, or a quiet prayer. Now you walk past with your eyes forward. You don't stop, you don't look. Not because you don't want to, but because you've learned not to. Someone always sees, someone always reports. And even if they didn't, what would be the point? The gods aren't there anymore, not where you can reach them. You don't talk about the war, not because it doesn't haunt you, not because you've healed, but because no one wants to hear it. The conquerors call it a campaign. The priests call it a triumph of faith. The officials call it history, already past, already buried. If you speak of it, they remind you how merciful they were to let you live, as if survival were a kindness, as if starvation, disease, and humiliation were better than being forgotten entirely. They want your gratitude, not your grief. The younger ones don't ask. They weren't there. They don't remember the drums or the dances or the sound of obsidian cracking bone in defense of something that mattered. They hear stories, sure, whispers from elders or fragments in songs, but they treat them like myths, like bedtime tales half believed and quickly dismissed. You could tell them more if you dared, but you don't. Because what would you say? That once the gods lived in this city? That once people danced with joy instead of fear? That once you mattered? They wouldn't understand. And you're too tired to explain. Peace has come, yes, but not the kind that brings comfort. This peace is flat, heavy, still. It doesn't sing. It doesn't breathe. It doesn't grow. It just sits, pressing down on your shoulders, like a wet blanket that never dries. You go through the motions. You eat. You sleep. You work. But you don't hope. Hope was one of the first things to go, burned up in the same fires that took your gods, your books, your names. There are no more festivals, no more colours in the streets. The only time the city gathers now is when the church demands it. And even then, no one smiles. You wear their clothes, you chant their prayers, you dig their graves, you watch them build statues to saints you don't know, on land that used to be sacred, and you stay silent. Because silence is the only freedom they haven't taken yet. You don't call this living. Not really. You call it remembering. That's all that's left. Not rebellion, not revenge, just memory. Quiet, flickering, stubborn memory. The kind you carry alone. The kind you pass down, not with words, but with gestures, glances, pauses too long to be casual. You don't tell your children what was lost, but you let them feel it. If they're paying attention, the city still stands. But it doesn't belong to you, and it never will again. No one ever told you that history was something you had to earn. You thought it just happened, to everyone. You thought surviving meant you'd be remembered. That suffering left a mark, but it doesn't. Not for people like you. You were never meant to be in the story. Not the kind that gets carved into stone or copied onto fresh parchment. Not the kind that survives. That kind of story belongs to other people. Men with swords, men with god books, men who get to narrate the ruin as if it were progress. You were never a hero. You didn't lead a charge, didn't slay a conquistador, didn't hold the temple doors against the tide. You didn't inspire rebellion or die dramatically. You didn't stand at the altar and curse the heavens. You hid. You knelt. You stayed alive in the quietest way possible. You ate bark. You drank rainwater. You bit your tongue until it scarred. And because of that, you don't qualify for legend. You don't make good poetry. You were never a villain either. You didn't betray your people. You didn't switch sides. You didn't sell out a city for gold or for mercy or for a name carved into a Spanish ledger. You just did what everyone else did, whatever it took to make it to the next morning. You lowered your head. You nodded when you were expected to. You agreed with things you hated. You survived. But in stories, survival without glory is just background noise. They will write about the emperor, about Moctezuma and his omens, his doubts, his golden palace. They'll write about the priests and the warriors, about the last stand and the last breath of a once great empire. They'll write about Cortes and his steel, his banners, his miracle god. The poets will sing of battles and martyrs, and kings brought low, but not of you, not of the woman who swept the market steps, not of the man who buried his children without markers, not of the thousands who simply watched their world fall and could do nothing but watch it. The priest will call it divine. They'll say your gods were false and theirs are true, and they'll build cathedrals on top of your temples as proof. They'll teach children that the conquest was mercy, that it brought light to a dark people. They'll speak your language only to correct it. They'll rename your cities and erase your gods, and act like the silence that followed was always meant to be there. They'll tell the story like it only ever had one side. You know better, but knowing doesn't keep you in the narrative. You've seen it happen already. Stories fading from mouths, names dropped from prayers. The old words feel heavier each year, like they know they're about to be forgotten. The songs you used to hum while you worked now only come back to you in fragments, like something lost underwater. You don't sing them out loud anymore. Not because you're afraid, because there's no one left who would recognise the tune. You've started to forget your parents' faces. Not entirely, just the edges, the way your mother's hand moved when she braided your hair, the sound your father made when he laughed from the belly. These aren't things you meant to lose, but they go one by one, like feathers in a wind too strong to fight. You don't talk about them. You don't write anything down. You don't have the words or the paper. And even if you did, who would read it? You aren't even sure what year it is anymore. The old calendar is gone, and the new one doesn't make sense to you. Days blend together. Seasons feel like afterthoughts. Time used to be marked by ritual, by cycles, by the motion of stars you used to know by name. Now, it's measured in chores, in church bells, in slow, dull hunger. You don't count the years. You count the people who are gone. One day, someone might find a shard of pottery, or a carved bone, or a scrap of cloth that once belonged to someone like you. They'll put it in a museum, behind glass with a label written in a language your grandchildren will understand better than you ever did. They'll call it artifacts from a lost civilization, But you weren't lost. You were taken. You were erased with intention. Carefully. Thoroughly. The story won't mention that. It won't say your name. It won't describe the way you held your breath every time a soldier passed by your door, or how your hands bled from harvests that fed someone else's table. It won't remember the girl who lit a candle behind her house and whispered an old god's name one last time. It won't remember how hard it was to keep living when everything that made life worth living was gone. No, you will not be in the story. Not really. You'll vanish between the paragraphs, between the burned pages, between the stones pulled down to build someone else's church. You'll be the breath that doesn't get recorded, the shadow in the background of someone else's triumph, the ash that falls after the fire, too fine to sweep up, too small to grieve. But for what it's worth, you were here, you endured, and even if they never write your name, the stones remember. That brings us to the end of tonight's story. Not of conquistadors or kings, but of the lives buried beneath their boots, the names not carved into monuments, the memories scorched before they could be passed down. If you're still awake, thank you for sitting in the ashes with me, for honouring a voice that history chose not to keep. If you'd like early access to more stories like this, ad-free audio of the episodes, or just want to support the show, the Patreon link is in the description. You can also like, subscribe, or leave a comment with more history topics you'd like to see covered. And if you're listening on a podcast app, a rating or review helps others find their way to these stories. Sleep well.